Hey, everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. I am Pastor Megan Rohrer at Grace Lutheran in San Francisco, www.gracesf.com. And we have worships pretty much every day for the rest of the week, noon and 7, but you can check out the full schedule on our website. And this week, you can check out all of the services, including the one we did last night, on my Facebook page, Megan Rohrer, Facebook. You'll find it. It'll be great. And yeah, and thank you to the over almost 400 people who have already watched last night's service. That's really awesome. Good job. And in Denver,
I'm just thinking that I need to watch your cool online service now.
you should. It was really cool.
Yeah. I'm not in Denver. Every week after correction.
Why do you say that every week?
I'm 2.5 hours from Denver.
In Colorado.
That's much better.
Sorry.
I'm in, my name is Daniel Tisdale, Pastor Daniel Tisdale. I am at First Lutheran of Gypsum, which is in the mountains of Colorado, far, far, far from Denver. Near Vail, the mountain, the ski resorts. And we have a lot of services this week also. We have Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Vigil all at 7 p.m. And Easter Sunday at 9, followed by an Easter egg hunt and a brunch, Easter brunch. Lots going on. Our Facebook page and web page are both First Lutheran of Gypsum, all one word, GYPSUM. And there's just a ton of stuff going on, so come on and check us out.
Yeah. And so if you've never done Holy Week before, Holy Week is what we call the week before Easter. Here's kind of the quick rundown of what happens. On Thursday, we're doing two different activities at Grace Lutheran. At noon, we're doing a hand washing service, and it remembers the time when Jesus' body is anointed before he dies, when a woman breaks an excessively expensive alabaster vase and puts this really expensive perfume on Jesus. And some people think that's Martha. Some people aren't sure. She's not really named. But so she anoints Jesus's body before he dies. And part of the reason for this timing in the Bible is because Jesus dies on the Passover, and you're not allowed to do certain things on the Sabbath. And so when the sun down and the sun up, Jesus wouldn't have been able to get the really good death preparation that all good Jewish folk would have. And so she does it in advance so that no one has to ruin their faith by breaking rules and all of that kind of stuff. There's also a story where Jesus washes the feet of the disciples and basically says, none of you are better than anyone else, and your job is to serve the world, not to rule over the world. And so Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, saying that he didn't need to wash all of them, just part of them, the parts of them that were dirty. And so it's a space where Lutherans can talk about how we think that everyone is part saint, part sinner, in a way that's intermixed and can't be separated. All of us have some good parts. All of us have some bad parts. Our job is not to rule over other people or be jerky or be conceited, but to be humble and to care for people as often as we can. In the evening on Thursday, we're also going to have an agape feast, which is a take on a Jewish Seder. I'll be making a lot of the foods that remind people of the 12 plagues of Egypt that are around the time of Moses. And there's a specific readings that when Jewish people are celebrating their Passover, there's a very long you tell the story this way. There's a piece of unleavened bread that you hide, and little kids have to find it. And there's a lot of wine drinking. If you've never been to one before and you're not a big drinker, know that you're supposed to drink 3 full glasses of wine during the service. So I give people little shot glasses who don't want to consume a lot but still want to kind of follow the rituals. I call it an agape feast because we have communion at the end of it, and we don't want it to look like we're taking the culture of another community. and incorporating it as our own. So we remember that same story of Moses using some of the foods, and we use it as a time to learn about how other Passovers happen, but we're not replicating a Passover, and I'm not a rabbi. And so we learn the stories without saying that we're better than other people. So hopefully we do that in kind of a kind and compassionate way. What do you do on Thursdays, Dan?
Much the same. We don't do it. We don't do. I'm sort of. You alluded to it. I really love when I grew up. We did a Passover, feast thing, and it is a little bit of appropriation. So I kind of avoid it. Although I grew up in my family, we had really close friends who were Jewish, so we went to Passover every year, and I told this story to the youth group. So I think maybe it's not appropriate for youth, but it was. So I told them, I can tell you, the first time I ever remember getting drunk was at Passover, because they tell you, I thought it was more than 3 cups. It's like 5 or 6 cups, but anyway, maybe not.
Depends on how you do it, yeah.
And they said, no, you just take sips. When it says drink the whole cup, just take sips. Well, I was like 12, and I was reading it and taking it literally and drinking full cups of wine, and it's really sweet wine. So when you're a kid, it's like, ooh, this is good. And I remember everybody wanted to go look for Easter eggs, and I just wanted to take a nap on my mom's lap after drinking 5 glasses of wine. So
yeah, my first communion was after one of those Passover services, but it was just like, you just had me drink 1 million glasses of wine.
Right.
I need your little cup on Sunday.
So here at First, we just have one service on Thursday night, and I will talk about each of the days separately, but I think every one of the days of Holy Week has its own sort of poignant kind of point or points. We'll do a largely ceremonial foot washing. When I first did this here, they hadn't done even Maundy, Thursday for years, and I said, I know that some people are uncomfortable to take off their shoes and have someone wash their feet, but part of the thing is that this time is about. This foot washing is about a lot of things. It's about understanding what it means to be a servant leader. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. It's also about being willing to be vulnerable and to bear our like, if you were to take a poll of people, at least people in the U.S., of what is the ugliest part of their body, I would say the majority would actually say feet, right? There may be other things. So getting people to expose their feet to someone, and we just pour water over them and we just dry them with a towel, is kind of being willing to be vulnerable. And this is if you're going to be vulnerable at any time in the church year, in the church calendar, this is the time. Mm-hmm. So we do that. And then the other two parts of the service that I think are really important is we do communion, but we're extra careful to talk about what communion's about and why we do it, because it's really the institution of Last Supper is part of one of the lessons for that night. So we talk about why communion is important and what it means to us. And then the other thing that I think sometimes most churches do this, but I think is just as important and pointed as those other two things, is the stripping of the altar. Mm-hmm. So we strip everything, and it's symbolic because Jesus has been arrested in the texts, and Jesus will be crucified the next day, and for it to look sort of bare with no color and we take the candlesticks, we take everything away, and it looks incomplete. And I think that's intentional. Whether people understand why or not, I've actually had people say in the past, I just felt like after you did that, I wanted to just put like one flower on the altar or something, because it just looked too bare. I'm like, good, that's what you should leave. You should leave with this feeling of incompleteness. Yeah. And so all of those elements in a relatively brief service, really I think they put your heart, your spirit into this place of, this is who we are. This is who we need to be, who we need to grow into, and sets us up for Easter. So it's, and every day, like I said, every day has its own thing, but Maundy, Thursday doesn't get enough credit, I think.
Yeah. One of the fun things that I do on Maundy, Thursday, which is from the ancient rite, is that I kiss I do hands because people don't want their feet shown, right? I wash their hands over a bowl that's the same bowl I do baptisms with. And important pastors out there, heat the water up. People like it better.
Yeah.
I kiss their hands to show kind of that the pastor loves them and cares for them throughout the entire year. And it's one of the very few times that we like have this intimate kind of touching moment. So I'll kiss their hand, and I will give them a gold coin. Because in ancient churches, they would give you a gold coin so that it used to be an obligation to give to the poor during Lent. And so during the time of hand washing, the priest or the pastor would give you a gold coin so that if you couldn't afford to meet your obligation to give to the poor, then you still had an opportunity before Lent was over. And so I give people a gold coin. I give them, you can go to the bank and you can just get like Sacagawea dollars that are gold in color. So it's not like real gold, because now that's worth way more than it used to be. So I just go to the bank and I get like a roll of dollar coins and pull out the silver ones and then just use the ones that are kind of golden color, and I'll give them to people. And then I'll tell them during kind of the talking time, I'll say, this is for you to help you fulfill your Lenten obligation to like care for the poor. And then I'll say, and all I ask of you, you can give it to anyone you want. You can give it to someone in church who asks you for $1. You can give it to like someone who needs money for the meter. You can use it for anything that you want. You just have to give it away. And I don't care who you give it to, but let me know who you gave it to and what happened. And it's one of my favorite things that happens during Holy Week is that people will say like, I met this homeless guy. It was so great. I never gave to the homeless, but like I had this great interaction because of this gold coin. Other people think it's a burden, and they're so frustrated that they haven't found anyone to give it away to that they're almost angry at me that I have given them this job to do. And other people are ponder who should get it and who's worthy of it and what does it mean that it's I always turn in, you can get a receipt from the bank for your roll of coins. So I make it like money that is from my pastoral expenses from the congregation, that it's the congregation's money. And so they have this moment where they're thinking about, how do I want to spend the congregation's money particularly?
Oh, wow. That's great.
So it becomes a very, like, depending upon who gets the gold coin, it takes on its own meaning of like, what is the value of this dollar? And I'm giving it out on behalf of this community. And so how should I give it out and who should I give it out? So I almost think that like whatever happens with individuals and their gold coin sometimes is a better sermon than anything that I kind of say with them. And it's one of very few times when people report back to me like what's happened since the worship service based on what I talked to them about. So I really enjoy Maundy, Thursday, and I enjoy giving people a gold coin. So feel free to do that in your spaces too, if that makes sense. On Good Friday, I found a really great way to do it, to not have to write a new sermon and to have at least one service that is pretty chill and easy. Because I'm doing 5 services this week because I do a noon service and a 7 o'clock service. So the noon service is for those who can't drive at night or don't want to drive at night. And then the 7 o'clock service is for those who work all day and can only come at night. And so I get really exhausted. I'm already exhausted and it's only Wednesday. And I've got, I know. So, so on Good Friday, I found a way to kind of like simplify what we do. Instead of like a full-on worship service, I have a book that is the reading of the Stations of the Cross in the way that they read them if you go on the walk in Jerusalem. And what I do is I pair those readings with like masterful artworks that I think help you kind of understand the visual of it. So I project these paintings on the wall and simply just read the scripture. And we do the first part in a small room with the pictures projected on the wall. And then at the end, when Jesus is on the cross, we move to our sanctuary where we have a large mosaic of Jesus slunk down dead on the cross, made from pebbles on the beach that the congregation kind of helped assemble. And it's one of very few times that we really get to kind of feature this mural and have it feel like it really fits with our worship service. And then that service I end by a really unique way of doing communion that I only do on that day of the year. And I do all of the like pastor gestures of communion, but I don't use any words because that part of the story has already completed, and I want just the story of Jesus dying on the cross. So I do the motions, and I hold up the cup, and I hold up the bread, and I give it out to people, and people then can sit in the sanctuary as long as they want to in silence and leave whenever they would like to. But I strip the altar at the noon service and pull it out at the end of that service and do not come back in the room. So it's like not only has all of the stuff left, but the pastor's gone too. And
you do that on Good Friday.
Yeah, I do it on Good Friday for like the effect of it. It only works for the ones who are at the first service.
Because we don't even do communion on Good Friday because it's bare. But I do the thing you said too about just leaving the room, because we normally have fellowship, after services on Sunday. But on Monday, Thursday, when the altar is stripped, I and the people that strip the altar stand in this really tiny room and wait 5 or 10 minutes for people to just leave, for them to realize that we're not coming back out.
Yeah. I put it on the bottom of the little program, but
yeah, we do too. But
and sometimes people come to like my office and want to chat. I just want to do it far enough away that if people are meditating, they have some like silent time, because otherwise people like get chatty.
Yeah. And on Good Friday, what I did, I fell into a tradition at a church when I was a member in Florida where they ended every Good Friday service with a drama.
Nice.
That was based on, the death of Christ or something related to that. And so I did that I did that 7 or 8 years, and I started writing Good Friday dramas for my own, for me to do, because I didn't like the ones that I could buy or find around and stuff.
Yeah.
So I started writing those, and then when I came here, I reused some of those that I also have done. Like last year, I showed the final scene, one of the final scenes from Jesus Christ Superstar with the music, which has the part I really wanted to show was there's this. If you've seen the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, there's this one section where it shows all of these icons of Jesus on the cross, along with the music. So it's like every beat, dun, 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 and it shows each one of those beats is a different picture of Jesus on the cross, or stained glass of Jesus on the cross. And then it ends with him being nailed to the cross. And then I just cut the movie at the end of the service. I'm going to do that again this year. And just like Thursday, it ends in silence and they're just supposed to leave. There's no closing hymn. And I think you said this, I don't preach on Good Friday.
Right.
So there are lessons and some hymns and some litanies and things. And then it ends with that, which takes, 10 or 15 minutes. And then it just, again, that's one of the times I don't wear an alb either.
Yeah.
I'm not doing communion. I will wear a stole, but then I will walk. I won't recess. I'll just go to the sacristy and close the door. Thursday and Friday, I do that. So it's again, I think, kind of like that Monday, Thursday thing of leaving is sort of open-ended and feels like there's not an ending. And I want them to feel sort of
it's like a come back tomorrow and see what happens next kind of week.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Holy Saturday, which is Saturday, obviously, what happens in a lot of churches is there's this long litany of the entire history of the world by reading different biblical texts. And it's like between 13 and 16, depending upon which ones your pastor picks for you. They're really fun. It's especially fun if you have people who can like act them out or read them in a fun way. At our congregation, we do Beatles Mass because it's fun and people like to come to it. And it's like a kid-friendly Easter service where people who don't come to church normally can feel like they can still sing the songs because they know all the tunes. And so we celebrate at like 4 p.m. in the afternoon and have like a Easter service like Jesus has come back. And The reason we do that is because there's so much travel and like brunches and all these activities that happen on Easter that sometimes the Saturday service has more people at it than the Sunday service. And so we want to be able to have a space for people to remember that Jesus rose from the dead, even if they still have to drive to grandma's house, but they don't want to get up early enough with traffic to be able to like go to church beforehand. And then I'll let Dan say what you guys are doing, because you guys are doing kind of more the traditional.
We do a vigil, but we don't do all of the readings. I was just looking. We do 9 readings. And
Yeah. Why do all of them when you can just do 9?
Right. And then we do an epistle reading and a gospel reading. And I had never attended a vigil until I attended one in Denver, and now I have attended vigils while I was in seminary. I attended vigils 3 of my 4 years, and what I really like about it is, so the early church was largely composed of people that were Jewish, and the Jews followed the Sabbath day better than us Christians do, and the Sabbath day, although traditionally nowadays the Sabbath day for Orthodox Jews is Saturday, I had read about the vigil that generally it was on a Sunday that was their Sabbath day. I don't know why that changed, or if it changed.
The moon, and because pagans have better parties than Christians, we just borrow their stuff and say.
So there wasn't an Easter Sunday service because they didn't go to church on Sunday. So the celebration of Easter was Saturday night, and it would be late. And they would go through the stories of the church, and then what we would think of as Easter Sunday service was the Easter Vigil. And so the end, now vigils are starting to come back in vogue lately. And so it's supposed to be this creative, kind of interesting storytelling time. There's very orthodox kind of traditional ways of doing it, where there's a procession and there's usually a bonfire at some point, and there's all these different things. And I do some of that. I sort of adapt it, but it's more. I'm going to put the chairs in a big circle, and almost everybody who's here will be a reader. It's a way to get people to come to church to the vigil is to
make them readers.
And then afterwards, when it ends, we literally celebrate Easter. There will be champagne and. This year,
strawberries. We do that too.
This year, I'm bringing in a chocolate fountain.
Ooh, we pre-dip our chocolate strawberries.
Yeah, but
because of the carpet.
Well, it's on wood, 130-year-old wood, but it's on wood, so it'll be fine. So, and I admit I stole that from House for All Sinners and Saints. The chocolate fountain part. Well, they do a vigil too. They do a really great job.
Champagne and chocolate is an Episcopal thing. They've been doing it forever, and they do it for their like midnight services.
Yeah. So traditionally, it's often done where that part of the celebration will be after midnight.
Mm-hmm.
But none of my people will stay up after midnight and then come to Easter Sunday the next day. Yes. So we'll celebrate the Easter celebration at 3 hours early, but that's fine.
Well, the ancient reason for that midnight service is it was the earliest you could end your fast.
Oh, well.
Right. So if you were fasting during Lent and you wanted to end your Lenten disciplines, you could do it like the very first opportunity would be to go to this like service that would either end at 12:01 or start at 12. And so it kind of depended on folk. Scooch is a little earlier. And if you have a 4 and a 5-year-old like I do, you scooch it to 4 o'clock because that's kind of the sweet spot after nap and before kids freak out again. So that's kind of our time.
I've been to different sort of settings, and I've seen these readings done with Barbies.
Oh, fun.
I've seen them done with someone wearing overalls and no shirt and in a very hillbilly accent. I've seen them done like the Star Wars rolling trailer. All sorts of different sorts of creative ways.
If you go on justlutheran.blogspot.com, you can see some that I did about 4 or 5 years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, where I illustrated some of the reading.
It's so much fun. I'm going to do the creation reading this year, and I've figured out a way to make it rain on command outside, and fog, and for the sun to come out on command. All of those things. So the bright, bright, bright sun. I had to find the highest lumen bulb I could find. I'm up to 4,000 lumens.
Jeez, that's like just like a projector strength.
Or more, yeah. Like 100-watt bulb is like 200 lumens, and I've got 4,000. So there you go. I'm trying to call up the sun. It'll be
There
fun.
you have it.
So
and on Sunday we're going to do the 9 a.m. Easter egg hunt, 9:30 pancake breakfast, and then our worship service at 10:30 a.m. All of these services, which I've talked about, we'll do on my Facebook Live. But I interrupted you, Dan.
No, you're fine. I wanted to quickly tell, if people don't know, here's the stories, some of the stories that we're going to do. The creation story, Noah and the flood, the testing of Abraham, where Abraham is told to put Isaac on the altar and sacrifice his own son, the deliverance of the Red Sea, the wisdom of God, a very favorite one of mine, the first part of Proverbs 8. Let's see, Jonah, the story of Jonah, the story of deliverance from the fiery furnace. We'll do all those, and there's a couple other ones we do. But
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a fun one. Last year we tried to find a way to make paper non-flammable. And it turns out that there's different chemicals you can pour on them to make them non-flammable. So we made little cutout little paper, like paper chain people.
Yeah.
And it like half worked. So they looked like toast. Like just lightly browned, where the guards that weren't treated burned up immediately. So I can't say it was fireproof, like fire resistant, I would say.
That's funny.
Yep.
Well, I think let's briefly talk about some of the Bible readings that happen on Easter Sunday, since Bible study is supposedly what we're up to. Hopefully that lay of the land makes you curious about services that might be around you. Maybe you'll want to check some out. For Easter Sunday, there's a lot of different choices that people can make. You can read something from the book of Acts that talks about Jesus being popular and that he came back from the dead to judge the living and the dead. I prefer the Isaiah text, which talks about, what's the line that I really like in it? That God's going to wipe away the tears from all faces, and the disgrace of his people will take away from all the earth, and that God is coming to save people. I'm a fan of that. Oh, I like the line that he's going to swallow up death forever. That one's really fun. So I prefer the Isaiah read. Again, there's choices between 1 Corinthians and the Acts. Here's the interesting thing that I want to talk about, and it's the difference between resurrection stories in the 4 different Gospels. So pastors can choose this on Easter Day proper. There's a different reading for the Saturday Easter service as for the Sunday Easter service. On Sunday, the 2 choices are between Mark and John. And Mark's gospel, for those who don't remember how it ends in chapter 16, is, if you look in your Bible, it literally will say first ending and second ending or alternative ending, because the oldest ending ends with the women going to the tomb, being told by an angel or by someone they didn't know or someone they did know. It's unclear who this person is, if it's a young man or if it's an angel. But they're told, go and tell everyone that Jesus has been resurrected. And they do nothing. And they do so much nothing that it's repeated 3 times in the Greek. They nothing.
It literally says they said nothing to anyone,
Yeah, they said nothing to no one, for they were afraid. And the point rhetorically in the story is that we have to go tell people because the characters in the story all failed, right? People did not like that ending to the story, because then the logical question is, well, then how does anyone know that happened if they told no one that it happened? And that's probably not fun to answer all the time. And so they wrote a second ending, which says, and then Jesus appeared and people poked his wounds and blah, 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 right? And Mark was the oldest of all of the gospel texts that were written. I really prefer the short ending. I like the idea that we have to go out and complete what was left incomplete, either by Jesus, who was supposed to be the Messiah and ensure everyone had food, that everyone had health, that everyone had rulers who weren't jerks to them. The Messiah was supposed to do all those things, and because they didn't get completed, we have to go out and complete them. So like, I like this rhetorical call for us to kind of continue on helping God's verbing in the world get completed. The John text is one of the few texts where like men discover that Jesus resurrected first, and then the women come second, which about that, right? The oldest versions say the women were the ones who discovered it. They were the only ones who didn't deny Jesus, and they were the only ones who paid attention and even watched the crucifixion happen. But John's text is like, yeah, the disciples already knew that, so they just like left. And it has Mary Magdalene seeing Jesus, but thinking that Jesus is a gardener. I think that's kind of cool because there's something going on with Jesus's body after the resurrection that no one recognizes it. So that's kind of fun as a transgender person to have a body that transforms. Jesus's body transforms at the transfiguration when he turns white, when he wasn't before. And then it also transforms again after the resurrection because nobody can recognize that it's Jesus, even though he keeps like appearing to people. And so I think that's kind of cool, this idea that Jesus's body changes. We don't know what it means, or like in some of the gospel readings, Jesus can walk through walls when he comes to visit the disciples. And in other readings, you can touch him and you can feel his flesh. And sometimes in the same story, Jesus both walks through a wall and they touch his flesh, right? Which means that the substance of Jesus's body is in question and people are arguing about it. The reason that this is important is because the difference, like the main difference between Catholics and Protestants is a fight about what it means in communion that Jesus's body appears in the communion. And it's the difference between the word of and the. Is this the stuff of God, or is it the God in our hands, right? And I like the idea that like this Reformation split where people can't agree on what bread is and what body is and how much of it is what, this idea of the substance of finding God and being able to point to it is a much older argument than the 500 years since the Reformation. It goes all the way back to those gospel writers. Another interesting thing that happens.
I was going to say the John story. Talking about the John story.
Yeah.
John is so different from the other three. So we say this a lot, but I think it helps to keep saying it, that Mark was a source for both Matthew and Luke, and so almost all of Mark, like 98% of the text in Mark, or at least the events in Mark, are contained within Matthew and Luke. And that's not to say that. So Matthew and Luke basically had other sources that expanded the story. John is totally different, and so there are stories in John that are not in other places. For instance, the doubting Thomas story is only in John. Mm-hmm. We think that's something that's common to all the Gospels. It doesn't come up in other Gospels. So when we hear about Thomas doubting, but I find it interesting, and I'm just going to leave this an open question so people can think about that. The parts that are the most different, for the most part, between the three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are the beginning and ends. The birth story, there is no birth story in Mark. The Matthew and Luke birth stories are very, very different in a lot of ways. And then the end stories, not as much the trial, but especially the resurrection stories, are very, very different in all three and all four. And I find that really interesting to kind of say, well, how did those sources come about, and where did those stories come from? I'm not implying that anybody made anything up, but it's interesting to think about, because they're all written at different times and by different people in different contexts. why did they write about that part of the story instead of another part of the story? Why was that included or highlighted? And I agree with you that the way the gospel in Mark ends, the traditional ending, and I think there are two. There's a shorter edition and then a longer edition, so there's really three endings. It lends itself to thinking about, well, what's next? What do we do now? As we continue the Easter story, and that's something that has kind of been an aspect of different Easter sermons for me in the past. So I like the Mark text for that reason.
Yeah.
It's almost like being told the whole, like when you hear the Matthew and Luke versions, it's almost like too much detail. It's like, okay, let me think for myself about what this means rather than you telling me, spelling it out. Don't mansplain the whole story to me. Let me figure it out myself.
Well, so here's some interesting, we call it mansplaining, but here's an interesting thing is that Mark's gospel says that the women were terrified and afraid, and that's why they did nothing. Matthew adds that they were afraid, but also joyful, right? And so there are ways in which the Matthew text has the women come off a little better. It's really only Mark's gospel that has the women being only terrified as their emotion. In Luke and in John, it doesn't really talk about the women being fazed very much or about their feelings. The other interesting thing that happens in Matthew's gospel is the only one that explains how the big stone gets moved. Matthew's gospel said it was an earthquake, that an earthquake happens and rolls the stone away. And so it continues to be a story of like the earth being on the side of Jesus, and clarifies that the person who appears is an angel who comes like the transfiguration, whose clothes are as white as snow. Mark's gospel leaves it kind of up to interpretation who this young man is, who's in the tomb already. Is it a disciple? Is it someone else? One of my favorite ideas about who the person in the tomb is something that my favorite professor from college came up with, the Reverend Dr. Richard Swanson. And
he's cool.
Yeah. He has a theory that the rich young ruler, who most people assume does not listen to Jesus because Jesus says, go sell everything that you own. And most people just assume that because he left with sadness that he doesn't do it. Dr. Swanson assumes that he does do it, and that he comes back, because there's this story during the arrest of Jesus where someone runs away and they're only wearing a sheet. And when they run away, the guy who's trying to apprehend him holds onto the sheet, and this guy runs away naked. Well, if the rich young ruler truly sold everything they had, including their own clothes, it would explain why there's some dude just only in a sheet with nothing else. And so he argues that the rich young ruler sold all of his things. He leaves, runs away with a sheet, and maybe he's naked and goes into the tomb because there are linen clothes left behind, and now he has something to wear. Right. And so the white that he's wrapped in the tomb is actually like the burial cloths of Jesus. Because of the space in between the stories and what we don't know, I like that as an idea. And it makes me excited to think that someone who history has often thought was like terrible and didn't follow through has this amazing story, because otherwise the details of the person running away naked is a strange detail. Right.
Yeah, it feels like it's stuck in there for no reason. Yeah.
Right. I mean, maybe it's a laugh line. If it was in a movie and someone ran away naked, I would probably laugh. But then it's like, who is this young man? And the phrase "young man" is also what is used to describe the young ruler, right? He's not a ruler anymore because he's given away all of his power and authority and his things. So that's kind of a fun thing to think about. If you want to, you can look at the parallels between all of the different readings, or you can flip between them and see which parts you like the best. Most stories will mix all four of the gospels, kind of like they do with the nativity, like there's only like sheep in two of them. But the Son of Man, which is made by the Bible movie people, although there's some parts of it that are very inaccurate and sort of made up. And they're very into their CGIs, and soap opera glances off screen like this. Um, it does a really good job with John's gospel. And what I like about it, if you want to watch it, it's on Netflix, is that they show men having a lot of emotions, and they show the disciples crying and being sad. And so in my recollection of like movies of Jesus's death, there's usually like a lot of blood, and there's a lot of unnecessarily, like there's this repetition in the Son of Man that's like, or sorry, it's called the Son of God, not the Son of Man. In the Son of God, there's repetition where like children are murdered for terrible reasons 3 different times, and then you have to watch the parents cry, and that was too much for me. But it's not overly bloody like the Passion of Christ. And it's the least anti-Semitic version of the Jesus story that I've ever seen. So I recommend it if you're interested in kind of seeing visually how this whole story goes, so that you can, like if you don't have the time to read all of the text through, but you do have 2 hours to like watch a hunky faith movie, in your head you can imagine there are way more people of color than in the casting, but it's not the worst thing you'll ever see. And so if you don't make it to a Saturday vigil or to an Easter service, I can pastor sanction watching the Son of God on Netflix.
I'm not going to promote any of the individual Jesus movies. I did mention Jesus Christ earlier, actually. Never mind. But I have sort of a theory about that because they all are faulty in their own way. They all get protested in their own ways.
Bible nerds.
And a lot of people are like, even a lot of pastors are really have issues with the Passion of the Christ, but I think it has some points that are worthy of conversation. And I feel like maybe this is a theory, right? Okay. About every decade or so, there's a new movie based on the Passion of Jesus. And since the 60s, we had Jesus of Nazareth in the 60s. We had in the 70s, we had Jesus Christ Superstar. We had Godspell. We had The Last Temptation of Christ in the 80s. We've had The Passion of Christ. We've had all these different, every so often there's a new one. And there's always an uproar about it. People who are not people of faith say, oh, we can't, this is, in our way and we don't want to talk about this. And even people who have faith are, well, it's not accurate, or this isn't right, or let's go see it. Or it's makes the news every time one of these movies comes out. I think that might be just God saying, you can't stop thinking about me. Like here's another reminder, right? If there's always a new Jesus movie out there, and this isn't to say that any of them. I really like talking about these movies because it's literally impossible to make a movie that's identical to what would have happened at the time of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so you have 2 options then. You can try your best, and some of them, like Jesus of Nazareth, The Passion of the Christ.
You forgot Life of Brian, which is really great.
I love The Life of Brian too. That's a great one.
Monty Python.
They're virtual high five. Some try to make it look as close as, even The Last Temptation of Christ, they try to make it look as much like Jesus' time as it was, but then you get into trouble because you're never going to be totally accurate. There's going to be something they're like, well, they couldn't have done that, or they couldn't have done this, and the flip side is doing something like Jesus Christ Superstar or Godspell, which, while they're both the only musicals on this list, they say, well, we can't be totally accurate, so let's do this in a different context. So Godspell is basically set in New York City. It has the Godspell is, all of the text is directly out of the Gospel of Matthew, almost word for word in parts. So, but it's set in Central Park, so it's this different sort of context. Jesus Christ Superstar was actually filmed in the Holy Land, but very modern text. The guards of the Romans actually have guns, and there's tanks, and so it's almost like, because they take some other modern context, it makes it a little bit freer to sort of tell the story in a way. But you can argue against either way of doing that. But you can't ever. I say this in my sermons a lot here at church, that there wasn't nobody was recording with video what was going on at the time of, and because I think sometimes people want that, you know, and so that's why interpretation is so important, and that's why I like these movies. It's not that they're people want them to be accurate. I'm like, well, I don't know what accurate was, but at least we have an interpretation,
Yeah.
and I don't always like all the interpretations, but I think it's a good thing that they're there.
Did you watch last year when they did the Tyler Perry narrated thing in Atlanta, where it was like live, but all throughout Atlanta? Like
No.
they did the entire story of like the Passion, but it like, and they had to like drive between places to like make it happen. And it ends with Jesus being resurrected on the top of this big building. Like,
Oh wow.
it was like a very interesting, and they had like pop stars.
They're,
Again, it wasn't 100% accurate, but I was like, good on you. That was like a crazy feat of like TV recording. And there's another one
they're
that they're
doing a live action Jesus Christ Superstar this year with Sarah Bareilles Ellis and John.
yeah, Usher.
John Legend is Jesus,
Yeah, right.
which is pretty awesome.
So here's the thing
Alice Cooper is Judas.
with Bible study that doesn't suck. You gotta like find what works for you. You gotta be able to like find the resurrection story that's your favorite and read that one. Find the pastors that preach sermons that work for you. Find the days on Holy Week that work for you. Find the ways to feed your senses. We talked about this at our service last night. Like, make your own home altar if the congregations near you aren't able to speak words of faith that help you connect with God. Like, be a connector. And as long as you're caring for the community and you're loving yourself and you're doing your best in a real attempt to like love God, you can't go wrong in any other way. Like, write your own Bible stories.
I agree. I want to add that
interactions with God.
I want to add that if you haven't done a Maundy, Thursday, or Good Friday service, for me personally, those services make Easter so much more important. And so typically at my church, which is not big, a Sunday service is 35 people, usually 35 people. Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday will be attended by maybe a dozen if I'm lucky. And Easter will be 70 because we'll get all the rare attenders and some visitors and stuff, and we'll be 70 or 80 people. And Easter is an important and meaningful and amazing service, but it means just that much more if you go to one of those other services. So, I mean, if I'm just making a plea, if you're watching this and you've never been to a Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday service, try it out.
Do it.
Yeah, try it out.
Well, thanks everybody for coming to our Bible study, and we'll see you next week. I'm going to Iceland, so hopefully I'll figure out how the time zone works, and then I'll see you.
Ooh, that would be cool.
Yeah.
And literally, possibly.
Bye everybody.